Making your own sourdough culture can be tricky and confusing, but I'm here to show you some easy steps which can simplify the process for you. The yeast is the life force of what makes your sourdough bread amazing and gives you that amazing oven spring rise. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content, smash that like button, and turn your bell notifications on so you wouldn't miss a video. And give me a follow on Instagram as well. Okay, so for day one, you're going to need a weighing scale and a glass jar with a lid or a mason jar. You don't need to do this, but I'm going to weigh the weight of my jar just to get an idea of how much my overall yield will be when I start feeding my yeast. Start off by weighing in 25 grams of strong white flour. Then add 20 grams of stone ground dark rye flour. Then you're going to add 45 grams of lukewarm water. An important note here, be sure that the measurement of the flour ratio is the same as the water ratio. Then using your rubber spatula, mix everything together. I personally like to use a chopstick because it covers every corner of pockets of dry flour. Remember, you need to mix this very thoroughly. Also, a pro tip, you would want to clean the inner sides of your jar to get a good view of your yeast growing. Next, I'm going to seal my jar, then place a rubber band, or you can of course use a marker to keep track of how far your yeast has grown. You'll also tell the difference if there's any signs of growth. And now we are ready for day 2. If you don't see any signs of growth, don't worry about it. Just be patient, take it one day at a time, and continue to feed your yeast, and eventually you'll see signs of growth. Next, you're going to add 25 grams of strong white flour, then 25 grams of stone ground dark rye flour, and 45 grams of lukewarm water. Again guys, the flour ratio should be the same ratio of liquid. Give it a good mix with my trusty chopstick, then cleaning the sides with a rubber spatula. Position your band on the right level of where your flour water mixture is, and that is it for day 2. And now it's time for day 3. As you guys can see, there's a significant process with your yeast. You can see how much it has risen, especially the air bubbles which have formed on the side, which is a sign of good fermentation and growth. Right now, a colony of bacteria is being multiplied and cultivated as we speak, and that is what's going to help give your sourdough a good rise. Not the bacteria which you usually see in test lab results, guys. Before we start feeding our yeast on day 3, you're going to notice that your yeast has formed good air bubbles and may have a distinct vinegary, almost like a rotten cheesy smell to it, which is completely normal and is actually a good sign of good growth. As we speak, the wild bacteria is being multiplied and are having a party of their own. Okay guys, so right now we're at day 3. Basically at this phase, you're going to see some signs of activation of the yeast itself. You're going to see it rise like how I showed you guys earlier in that video. Just some things to look out for in terms of fermenting your actually sourdough starter. First of all, one, you need to have a dry, warm area, like a storage room or a pantry area where there's no basically air conditioning or anything. Not too hot, of course, and not too cold of an environment. Otherwise, the yeast activation and the multiplication of the bacteria will not be as effective as you would expect it to be. That's the first thing. Secondly, you need to ensure that it's actually a mason jar or just a used pickle jar like the one that I have right here. Not tightly sealed. Of course, and one final thing, guys, one of the best signs to notice that your yeast is basically activating pretty well is when you open the jar, there should be some kind of vinegary, fermenty, soury type of smell and taste into it. Not taste, basically, like a soury smell to it. So if you have that, that means that it's a good sign that your sourdough starter is actually going the right way. For day 3, I'm going to add the same measurements of flour and water ratio as day 2. You guys probably know where I'm going with this by now. Don't forget to stir in the flour and water mixture and clean the sides. And that is it for day 3. Next, we move on to day 4. As you guys can see, we have a significant amount of growth compared to the past 2 days. We are also seeing good signs of good fermentation as well. So first thing we're going to do is to discard some of the mature starter, which is around 98 grams. You can either throw it away, freeze it, or just pan fry it with some herbs and spices, which can also be good for a nice snack. You can even make sourdough pancakes with it as well. Next, we're going to feed your starter by adding 40 grams of plain white flour and 40 grams of stone ground dark rye flour. And again, same amount of flour is equivalent to the same amount of liquid. Stir well and ensure you cover every pocket spaces of flour and clean the sides as well. By now you guys should see a significant difference between day 3 and day 4 of how much your yeast has grown and risen. And now it is time for day 5. I'm going to discard 656 grams of the mature starter, and I'm going to add 50 grams of strong white flour. Next, 40 grams of stone ground dark rye flour. Then 90 grams of lukewarm water. Give that bad boy a good mix, and clean the sides, and your final day of feeding is done. Moving on to day 6, your sourdough starter is ready for usage. My opinion, before using your starter before baking, is to ensure that you have done a bulk feeding 24 hours ahead of time. You want to be able to use your starter when it's at its peak level condition. Of course, as I have mentioned earlier, you should get a nice fermenty, soury, vinegary smell to it. I know this process has taken a while to do, but it just shows you the value and appreciation of what it's like to make your own starter. I personally find it very addicting and educational.